Hi guys, so before we get into it, a very quick disclaimer that you'll find all my other Amicus reviews in my Amicus playlist, and there will be spoilers today for this very old movie. It definitely counts as old. I would have been -8 when this came out, and I've been on this planet a long time now. So this was the middle chapter of Amicus's run of portmanteaus, i.e. it was the 4th one that they did out of 7. Watching it the other night, I could remember all of the stories apart from one of them, which was slightly bizarre. There's 5 this time. There's a good chunky amount of content in this film. This is the first time since Dr. Terror's House of Horrors we've had 5 main stories, and I'm going to talk about all those stories in the order in which they appear in the movie. But before we go there, I'm going to address the wraparound tale. So let's do that then. So we begin with our 5 main characters going on a tour of a crypt that's connected to some catacombs, but they fall behind the rest of the tour group and get lost in the maze, and they end up stumbling into this random room with some old geezer in it who quickly fixes it so that they can't leave said room. And then he starts telling 5 tales, one for each of the characters in front of him. And I think we're meant to think that these are forewarnings of events to come in the future, but spoiler alert, it turns out that the stories have already happened in the past and these characters are dead. They just don't know it yet. But you know what? This isn't really giving anything away, because in the first of the main stories, there's a very clear clue that all of the main characters are already dead. You'd have to be not paying attention to miss it. This whole scene with this Crypt Keeper character, it very much reminds me of the ending to Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, when Indy goes into that room with all the holy grails, and you've got that old guy giving all the wisdom and stuff. There's not much that happens between the main stories with this linking narrative. But at the end of the whole thing, a crack opens up in the wall and there's like this fiery pit of hell. So the running theme in this film is that all of our main characters are bad people who have done bad things, and therefore they will be going to hell. But it's a little bit harsh in the cases of 1 or 2 of them. I'll come to those particular people as we're going through the review. We only see one person jump into the fiery pit, and actually he kind of falls in by accident. He does a funny fall that's kind of like, against a fake background, you know, the sort of fall that you'd often get in old movies. There's a good one at the end of RoboCop as well. The other 4 characters then start to walk towards the pit as if they are going to voluntarily jump in, which I just find that very odd. I mean, if I was in that situation, I think I would probably just stay up top with the old guy. I wouldn't even starve to death, would I? Because I'm already dead, right? But whatever. But the whole segment is fine. It's not one of the strongest openings to one of these anthology films. I do like the music that you get right at the start. It's that kind of horror accordion type thing. It's a really famous piece. I don't know the name of it, but it really puts me in the mood for the movie ahead. So our first of the main stories sees Joan Collins, presumably in the absolute peak of her foxiness, because she looks absolutely stunning in this. She's playing a housewife who wants to bump off her much older husband. And the only weird thing about this is the size of the house they live in, because with this kind of scheme, you would think that the husband and the rest of the family would live in like a really large house and he would be a millionaire or something. But this place that they live in, it looks like just a random house that could be on any street anywhere, owned or rented by any family. But that small detail aside, it's a great little story that gets off to an absolute flyer, because Collins just kills this guy straight away with no messing around. There's no shaky hands. She just gets straight into it. And then for the rest of this story, she's trying to drag the body towards the cellar, but then she hears on the radio that there's an escaped lunatic in the area from the local asylum. He's dressed like Santa Claus, and lo and behold, he just happens to turn up at this particular house, and he won't leave this house alone. Even though he can't get in, he's circling the place, he's looking in the windows. I think the reason why he doesn't just move on to another house is because at some point he sees the dead body on the floor, and it kind of piques his interest into definitely wanting to get into this house no matter what. So I think the ironic thing about this whole situation is, if Joan Collins hadn't killed her husband, then the killer might have just looked through the window, seen nothing of interest, and just moved on. So it's like she's being punished for doing the murder, if you see what I mean. But it's really cool seeing this character trying to deal with two problems at once, trying to get rid of the body at the same time as she's constantly having to hide behind the curtains and close all the shutters really quickly and stuff like that. And what just puts a cherry on the top of this excellent story is the music that you get to listen to all the way through, because constantly on the radio we're getting all these Christmas carols like Silent Night and Away in a Manger. There's loads of them. Now personally, I absolutely love Christmas. I know that's most people, but I feel such a nostalgia anytime I hear Christmas music, Christmas carols, and getting to watch a short horror story full of these songs, and at the same time I'm watching horror, which is one of my favourite things to do. It's mixing two really great things from my life, and I can't remember too many times I've had that before. So as an opener to this overall film, this one is absolutely fantastic. Next up, we have Reflections of Death. So here we have Ian Hendry, who I mostly remember from Get Carter. He plays a really funny character in that film. Here, he's playing a guy who's cheating on his wife. So we see him claim that he's off for a business trip for the night. You know, the oldest trick in the book. How any woman ever falls for that, I don't know. So he goes and meets his much younger lover, and then they go on a car journey together. And I think they are going to check out the new apartment that they've bought. I think the guy is intending to leave his wife, ultimately. I'm a bit hazy on why the car journey happens, although we can see that the woman he's having an affair with is packing up and getting ready to leave her flat permanently. But you know what, it doesn't really matter. But they have a car crash on this journey, and then the story really veers off in a different direction. Reality seems to shift somewhat. We're not sure if we're watching events in the past or the future, or whether Ian Hendry is dead or not, whether his girlfriend is dead or not. And I'm not going to describe the plot in terms of every last possible detail, but it's really fun watching this, trying to figure out what the hell is going on and what the situation now is. And the whole thing wraps around very nicely, because we end up back in the car again, ultimately, before it crashes. I found the whole tale very clever and also very creepy, especially the scenes where the main character is walking around, but we can't see his face, but other people are reacting with horror to him, like he's become really gruesome somehow from the crash. I love this story. I think it's a really great one. The only slight issue I have about it, and this goes back to something I was saying a few minutes ago. So, okay, this guy has had an affair, which is not a great thing to do, but does he deserve to go to the fiery pits of the Crypt Keeper's hell for that? I'm not so sure. I mean, you know, having an affair is a bad thing, definitely, but it's not the same as murdering somebody like what Joan Collins did in the first movie, or raping somebody. You know, there are different tiers of evil, and I just don't think you can put having an affair in the same category as some of the really worst crimes that human beings can commit. I'm not sure that cheating on your partner means that you should go to hell necessarily. I mean, yeah, you deserve to be divorced, and you deserve to see your wife go off with a much nicer guy. That would be a very just punishment. But going to hell? I don't know. But leaving that aside, I love this story, and up to this point of the overall movie, we are going great guns, because this is 2 for 2 for me. So, just as I say that, we arrive at the one story in this film that I don't like, and I feel really guilty about saying that, because Peter Cushing's in this one. He plays a widow who lives in this really ramshackle house. So the way I picture this street is, I just picture like a long row of cheap-looking working-class houses, and then on the other side, a load of much larger, wealthier homes. There are streets like this in the UK. I've seen them with my own eyes. You'll drive down the road and the two sides will look vastly different in terms of probable property value, and you can just imagine certain snooty types looking through the curtains at the poorer side, secretly resenting the fact that people they perceive to be Wayne and Waynetta Slob lived just across the road from them, probably driving down the value of their own properties. But unlike in this short story, in real life, those people won't start a campaign of abuse to get their neighbours to commit suicide or move away and sell their properties, because that's what happens here. You get this young, obnoxious guy, this rich kid who doesn't actually seem to do any work. All he does all day is plot for ways to take down this character, Grimsdyke. I've never heard that name before, but it sounds like a typical sort of working class northern name, like Grimsdyke from Grimsby or something like that. This kid, he's the worst character in this entire movie for me, or at least he's the character I despise the most out of everybody, and yet he's not the worst character in the movie if you think about it, because his only aim here is to try and get Grimsdyke to move away. And bear in mind, we've had a story earlier where Joan Collins has bashed somebody's brains in, and yet I didn't dislike Joan Collins' character anywhere near to the extent that I dislike this annoying rich kid. He's just absolutely horrible. But this story on the whole is really simplistic. It's a case of, okay, guy is driven to suicide, comes out of the grave as a dead guy and gets his revenge on the person who tormented him. The end. It's very straightforward. There's no really interesting wrinkle to it for me. The only good thing about it is literally Cushing's performance. He's brilliant in this. He really makes you feel for this old guy. The performance is so heartfelt. I mean, he's having his dinner in front of a portrait of his late wife, and his tone of voice when he's speaking in this, it really just gets me. The thing is, Cushing actually lost his real life wife about a year before this film was made, roughly. So how he was able to even do this part, it's bonkers. I don't know how he did it. I mean, I know he was the consummate professional by all accounts, but it would have been too much for me. How did his agent even broach the subject with him about this part? You just imagine him ringing him up and being like, "Hey, Peter, so hope you've been keeping well. I hope you've been getting over your wife okay. This part's come up. It's about this guy who is getting over his wife, and he's all suicidal and depressed, and we thought of you, so why not, I just can't imagine it. But I mean, from what I've read over the years, Cushing was quite a good-natured guy who didn't get upset very easily. So I don't know, maybe Amicus and his agent were perfectly comfortable raising the possibility of him doing this part. And I guess the fact that it's only a short story where he was only required for maybe a few days filming helped. If this had been a full-length film and he was having to play this part, that might have been a lot harder. But the story is just too kind of straightforward for me. There's nothing interesting about it. There's nothing clever about it. So for that reason, I don't know. I just wasn't entirely down with this one. So yeah, it's the worst one of the anthology. Normally I might say, given that we have 5 main stories, maybe they could have taken this one out. But the overall movie is actually only 92 minutes. So I guess they couldn't take it out. Wish You Were Here is the story that I mentioned earlier that I couldn't remember once it started. I mean, this begins with a husband and wife couple. They're in financial trouble somehow. And I was watching this thinking, okay, is this the one where the husband buries himself in a coffin somehow and gets someone else to bury him, maybe, to get some insurance money, possibly? But it turned out to not be that. I don't know if I'm thinking of a later Amicus film or a VHS film, possibly. No, what this actually is a variation on the old monkey paw story where somebody or a pair of somebodies get 3 wishes and they've got to make the best of those wishes, but ultimately they will end up cocking it up somehow and ending up with nothing or ending up dead or whatever. The version of this story that I read about when I was a kid was totally different. So it involved a couple who lived in the woods. They were really poor. They lived in like a ramshackle hut or something. They constantly struggled to put food on the table, and one day somehow they got 3 wishes from some old artifact or something. And the husband straight away wasted one of the wishes by asking for a big plate of sausages, one of the most stupid things you can do with a wish. And the wife got really upset for obvious reasons and wasted another wish, wishing for her husband to have a really long nose like Pinocchio, just to teach him a lesson. Now, the husband and wife argued for a bit and then calmed down, but they realised that they would have to use the third wish to reset the husband's nose. So the story ended with them realising that they'd wasted 3 wishes and they were still no better off than they were at the start of the story. Now, that's the version I remember of this. In Wish You Were Here, it plays a lot different, albeit at the end, the couple are in dire straits. They haven't made their situation any better at all without spoiling anything. It would be hard in real life, though, to make use of 3 wishes. I think a lot of people would probably cock it up, because a lot of people would ask for like £1 million or something, and they might try and be exact about it and say, I wish for £1 million in my bank account. Don't give me it in cash, I want it in my bank account. And they think they were being clever that way. But if £1 million suddenly appeared in somebody's bank account, the bank would probably not let you keep it, because every amount that turns up in an account that's like outlandishly big, if they see that it's not really come from anywhere, they're not going to let you keep it. You know, money has to have come from somewhere in order to arrive at somewhere. So I could see lots of people, even in the real world, completely cocking up the exact phrasing of how they wish for stuff if they were in a real life situation like these characters. But this husband and wife, they absolutely cock up their situation, or at least the wife does. It's mostly the wife who's completely stupid in this story. Her first wish, she just asks for lots of money, but that could just get you £10 or something, because to somebody in the world, £10 is probably a lot of money. So, you know, nowhere near exact enough with that. And she just goes from bad to worse as this story progresses. The husband character is one of the main characters from the beginning of the movie in the Crypt. And he's the only guy in this film, actually, who doesn't seem to be a bad guy. His only crime here seems to have been to get his business into debt, but it's not worthy of going to hell, is it? So this story sort of breaks tradition with the rest of the film for me. But that being said, it's still a lot of fun. This one definitely gets the anthology back on track. I thoroughly enjoyed it as a variation of an age-old tale, and yeah, it's pretty cool. So in our final story, we have a retired colonel, or possibly it's a major. It's some kind of high rank in the army. This guy, he becomes the manager of a care home, and instantly he starts tampering with the budget. So he starts allowing the elderly people to have less and less heating on a night. He gives them smaller food portions than what they've had in the past. And he's redirecting all of this money to his own office so that he can have swankier meals himself, 3-course meals by the looks of it. And he's bought up all these expensive paintings to go on the wall. And just like with the Grimsdyke story, it feels like there's some really on-the-nose social commentary with this one. I mean, even in 2024, this feels very relevant. I don't want to get too political on the channel, but it is something that happens in England a lot. Care homes, hospitals, constantly having their budgets just trimmed, and where does that money go? Nobody knows. But the old people in this story, they put their foot down and say enough's enough, and they end up trapping this major character down in the basement, and they force him to play this game of sorts where he's got to go through this maze that's really dangerous. It's got like a thin slit with glass in the sides of it, and he's cutting himself trying to get through it, and there's a half-starved dog for him on the other side. And the final moment in this is absolutely glorious. It's a really satisfying finale. It was not lost on me when I was watching this that at no point during the Major's captivity does he apologise for anything he's done. He doesn't try and barter with the older people. He doesn't say, look, let me out and I'll give you your food rations back and your heating and all that. He doesn't do that. I think he's just really sort of steadfast in his position. He's really confident that at some point he'll find a way out of this predicament, but he doesn't in the end. And I just loved the ending to this. The whole story feels like a precursor to Saw, like 3 decades later, this idea of somebody who doesn't fully appreciate life, he's got no sense of empathy or anything like that. He's forced to play a game, a life or death puzzle of sorts, and you know, it could really cost him if he doesn't go through a lot of pain to get to the other side, just like a proper Jigsaw film or something like that. It wouldn't surprise me if it turned out that Lee Whannell and James Wan watched this film maybe 20 years ago and just sat there thinking to themselves, you know what, this has got potential, except we'll take out the half-starved dog and we'll put a reverse bear trap on the Major's head, and then it'll be perfect. Yeah, we'll call it Saw. That'll be great. Time to show you the version of the film that I've got for this. So here is my Blu-ray copy of Tales from the Crypt. It also includes Vault of Horror, so a double film disc, which is quite cool. I can't remember what it cost because I bought it years ago. I'm pretty sure, though, it would have cost a hell of a lot less than that really expensive The House That Dripped Blood Blu-ray that I was showing off in a recent video. The movie looks fantastic on this, no issues there. And in terms of features, there's not much. There's a stills gallery, but there's also a documentary called Tales from the Amicus Crypt, which is 36 minutes long. I've not watched that, but that sounds quite extensive, so maybe I should put it on. Right, shall we get to the bag of terror and find out how I'm going to score this? Yes. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4.5 bloody axes out of 5. I think this is a really good horror anthology by Amicus. I've probably been a little bit generous. I don't know. 4 out of 5 is basically 9 out of 10, isn't it? Almost masterpiece territory, but yeah, this I don't remember this one being as good as this. I was really blown away by this the other night. The first 2 stories are amazing. Little bit of a down dip with the Grimsdyke one, although it wouldn't surprise me if other people had a different opinion about that one than me. Just an instinct I've got about it. So maybe it's not that bad for most people. And the 4th and the 5th story really gets things going again, and finishing off with the death of that Major. Brilliant way to end. So Tales from the Crypt is absolutely awesome. It was always going to be between 4 or 4.5. I've gone for the more positive score. Might have overdone it a little bit, but I do love these movies, and I'm satisfied enough with this score. Right, before we wrap up, I'll quickly give you another reading update, because I've been doing that a lot recently with my recent reviews. I've just been doing a little update as to how I'm getting on with my horror reading. In fact, seeing as this is obviously going to be a permanent feature of my reviews now, I'm going to make it its very own section with its own picture. So the last time I did an update, I think I was on chapter 17 of The Shining. Well, now I am up to chapter 28. I've done 11 more chapters since the last film review on this channel. I've reached the part of the book now where Jack Torrance is starting to go completely crazy and his wife is getting seriously worried. So we're starting to get to the real meat of the whole thing, I think. I'm about sort of 65% of the way through it at this point, but I'm really enjoying it. It's really good stuff. And I guess we will leave it there for today. So thank you for joining me. Until next time, cheerio, bye-bye.